Well, in that case, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for attending our webinar. The topic for today is California Senate Bill 326, new requirements for condo balcony inspections and do-it-yourself inspections. So, before we begin, there are a few items I would like to cover. The first is our presentation today will be 1 hour and 30 minutes long. This includes questions interspersed throughout the presentation that will be answered live. We will also have time for some live Q&A after the presentation as well. Secondly, continuing education units are available for this webinar. If you've already informed us during the sign-up process, your credits will be processed later this week. If you have not, please email rsvp@abbae.com to complete this process. And finally, our talented speakers today will be Mr. Karim Allana, the CEO and founding principal of Allana, Buick, and Bers, and Mr. Ritchie Lipson, the Director of Client Relations for Kasdan, LippSmith, Turner, LLP. And now, without further ado, I present Mr. Karim Allana to explain our ground rules and introduce Mr. Ritchie Lipson.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Doing webinars instead of real seminars have become sort of the norm, as you all know. We're so happy that you could all attend. There are over 100 of you that are attending this webinar, and we're really thrilled to have you all. Because of privacy concerns, you will not be able to see each other's names and who the people are. We can see you, but you as attendees, you can't see each other. By default, you are muted. So if you wanted to speak or ask a question, you can. You have to hover down below and look at the section about question and answers or chat or more. And down below your screen, if you hover your mouse, you'll be able to select one of these options. And so there are some fundamental rules about this. The best and easiest way to ask a question is through the Q&A chat. And if you want to do Q&A, just simply press the Q&A button and you'll be able to type in a question. That question will be read by all the panelists and we'll be able to respond to you. If you want to chat and send a private chat to the panelists, like myself or Ken or Ritchie, you can press the chat button and then you can type in a request or a message that you can send us privately. Then the last option is if you want to speak and ask a question, you can press the more button. And if you press the more button, you get more options. And one of those options is to raise your hand. So press the raise your hand button, which will give us an indication that you'd like to say something. And if you'd like to say something in person, we will unmute you so that you can speak. But we're keeping, as a matter of rule, we're keeping everybody muted because we just don't want chaos with over 100 people asking questions at the same time. So I hope you understand that. The chat button is always a good thing if you want to just privately talk to us. And here's the mute button. And towards the end of the seminar, we will basically allow people to mute themselves automatically and start asking questions. So you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions at the end of the seminar. And during the seminar, if you want to ask questions, then you have to raise your hand in order to do so. I'd like to introduce you to one of our panelists today and speakers, Mr. Ritchie Lipson. Ritchie is an attorney with Kasdan, Lipson, and Turner. He's been at it for more than 20 years, actually a lot more than 20 years. But he has worked on multiple types of projects and especially specializing in homeowners association and residential property owners and the issues that they face for construction defect, any issues And it's a good idea if your project has any of these balcony type of distressed issues that to consult with an attorney and ask questions. And Ritchie will go over some of those issues with you and talk about it and tell you why it's important to get the legal perspective on this. So without further ado, Ritchie, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Karim. A little bit about Kasdan LippSmith, Weber Turner. Let's see what we got here. Can you give me the full screen, Karim, so I can?
Sorry about that.
There we go, perfect. A little bit about us before we get started. And I know a lot of you have probably sat in on a SB 326 presentation for when we were doing seminars in person last year. Ours is a little bit different take today, so I think you'll find it interesting, and it's especially relevant in the COVID environment we're in. Our firm has offices throughout California, Northern California, LA, and Irvine. We're also in Hawaii, Arizona, and New Mexico. Again, like Karim said, we specialize in construction defect work for associations all over the Western United States. And SB 326, as we all know, is an interesting new bill that's going to impose a lot of work for managers and board members. We'll get the technology part down here in a minute.
Yeah, Ritchie, just press up and down button, I think.
Yeah, I need you to give me full screen, I think.
Yeah. Or I can advance the screen for you if you like.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right, there we go. So at Kasdan, our goal when we get a case is to try to get it resolved as early as we can in the process. But we prepare all of our cases if they're going to trial, which we have to. And one of the key aspects of our firm is we have innovative fee solutions. Most of our cases, 99% of them, are handled on a contingency basis, and we advance all costs. Today, we're going to cover a few things. The first thing is the actual duty to inspect. It actually lives and breathes separate and apart from the requirements of SB 326, the inspection requirements for balconies. We're going to talk a little bit about, as a board member, the fiduciary duties and that are attached to this duty to inspect. And then Karim's going to get more in detail about why this bill came about, what are common balcony failures, how do you implement SB 326 with COVID going on, and an innovative way of how you can do some self-investigation and self-examination. So before we get too far into the details of what defects look like and how you can inspect on your own, we have to talk about what the bill says itself. It's not a very long bill. I encourage you all to go, you can just Google SB 326 and you can get the text. It's really a very short bill. But there is some important detail to know about. And the first thing are in the definitions section. So the first thing that is required is a visual inspection by a licensed architect or structural engineer of the exterior elevated elements. Some of you might have heard about SB 721, which was a balcony inspection bill that applies to apartments. We were on the Legislative Action Committee for CAI, which right at the last minute, we carved out homeowner associations from SB 721. We may refer to some of that today because it's different, but we've both had some experience with 721, which has been in place for a year. So some nice, valuable lessons we've learned from it. So a visual inspection by a licensed architect, a structural engineer is required under SB 326. What do you have to inspect? Exterior elevated elements. They're defined as the load-bearing components together with their associated waterproofing systems. What does that mean? Well, it's defined in the bill. So go ahead to the next slide, Karim, and we'll talk about what load-bearing components are and associated waterproofing elements. So associated waterproofing elements of wood frame balconies include flashings, membranes, coatings, sealants that protect the load-bearing components of exterior elevated elements from exposure to water. So it's basically everything that goes into creating the waterproofing system of balconies. And we'll talk a little bit about, it's also elevated walkways. We'll talk about that definition, what's included and not included. But it's a very broad definition. And when you see pictures of what goes into the waterproofing systems, which Karim's going to talk about, there's a lot of things that need to interact with each other properly. Otherwise, the balconies and the elevated walkways have exposure, which can deteriorate the wood framing. A load-bearing component includes decks, balconies, stairways, their railings, and here's the important distinction. It has to be a walking surface elevated more than 6 feet above the ground level that are designed for human occupancy or use and are supported in whole or part by wood or wood-based products. So what does that mean? Concrete decks, steel frame walkways, higher, mid, and high rises, not going to be applicable. You're not going to have to look at those systems because they're not or part generally made with wood or wood-based products. Not be included as little Juliet balconies you see all the time. A lot of architects will use that. If you can't walk on them, it's not included in the definition. What inspections have to be done and when do they have to be done? So the first requirement is that at least every 9 years you have to complete the inspection. And that's first round inspections though has to be done by 1/1/25. And there's a real risk we'll talk about a little bit later about waiting too long. We've seen this in all the type of bills that have deadlines like earthquake retrofits in Los Angeles and other areas. People wait till the last minute, and then you can't get people to do inspections. You can't make people do repairs. So it's really important to start planning for this now. Go to the next slide, Karim, if you don't mind. So what kind of inspection is required? And this was a lot of wrangling between the SB 721 balcony bill and this ultimate bill that came out, SB 326. In 721, apartment developers have to actually physically take part and do intrusive testing of a percentage of the balconies. We were successful when this bill was passed to take that out. But there's still, and Karim get into this in detail, there still are a lot of requirements associated with how you determine if the waterproofing elements are put together properly. So what the bill says is that the visual inspection will be the least intrusive method necessary to inspect the load-bearing components. It includes visual observation. Go back one more, let me just finish that. In conjunction with moisture meters, borescopes, infrared technology. So each exterior element that's found to be defective, decayed, or deteriorated or does not meet its load requirements, that would constitute a threat to life safety or health or safety. So this is a life safety bill. It's important to remember that. And the burden is going to be on the architect and the structural engineer. And that's, Karim's going to talk about that, is how is that burden going to be satisfied through his inspection? So go to the next slide. Thank you. So after the inspections are done, what kind of reports are required? What do you have to do? The bill specifically provides that a written report needs to be issued. It doesn't really say when, unless it's immediate threat to life safety, but it does lay out the requirements. So the first thing the report has to cover is a description of what the load-bearing components and associated waterproofing systems are. It has to state if there's a current physical condition or whether there's any, what the condition is of both and whether there's any issue or immediate threat with health or safety. It has to identify what the expected future performance and useful life is, basically a reserve study analysis, and then go a step farther and say, is there what repair or replacement is recommended? That report has to be stamped by the professional, the architect or the structural engineer, and presented to the board. Then any impact on the existing reserve study needs to be incorporated. If a 10-year deck is now going to last 5 years, then you have to redo your reserves based on that new useful life recommendation. Go ahead to the next one. Now here's the key. If the inspector determines that there's an immediate threat to life, to safety or life, then that report must be presented to the association immediately upon completion. And you have to get the local enforcement agency, the building department, involved within 15 days. So basically, you're going to, depending on the scope of this, you're going to have to shut down your elevated walkways, your balconies until you make repairs because it's a life safety issue. What does the bill provide in terms of repair obligations? Okay, well, it requires that if you have a life safety threat, obviously you need to take immediate preventative measures, including preventing occupant access until the repairs have been inspected and approved by the local enforcement agency. So you're going to have to get a permit more than likely. And for that time, you're going to have to restrict access to the balconies or the walkways until this immediate threat of life safety is repaired. And we've had multiple cases where we actually have to not allow Bers to get on decks because of either railing issues or where there's actual life safety or structural challenge with a balcony or elevated walkway. So that's what the bill requires, and it's detailed, and it's important that whoever you hire to do these investigations make sure that they comply with the bill, because you don't want to do it. You don't want to do it twice. But let's backtrack a little bit and talk about this duty to inspect separate and apart from the SB 326 requirements. And it's important because if you're out doing balcony inspection and you already have a pre-existing duty to inspect, you need to look at everything. I mean, that was existing before SB 326. And we were actually successful to get this balcony inspection, the HOAs, taken out of SB 721, the apartment bill, with this argument that there already was an independent duty of boards and associations to conduct investigations. So that's why we're successful of getting out of that initial bill. The requirements that exist already are really threefold. One, CC&Rs. CC&Rs often, especially newer condominiums, will require expert independent inspections, either annually, could be every 3 years. You'd see those provisions in the CC&Rs, and it's important to look for those and find them. The other thing was the reserve study. The actual reserve study obviously requires every 3 years for you to do an update. And when you do the update, the actual code requires that a reasonable, competent, diligent visual inspection's done. Interesting thing is that when you talk to the reserve guys, and we've done a few seminars in conjunction with the reserve companies, they are not willing to, they can't take the risk with the balcony inspections. You're going to need an architect and a structural engineer. So there's no way that they can comply with SB 326. The other important thing to know about is when you bring a construction defect claim, if you're not following the builder's manufacturer's recommended maintenance schedules, which often include inspection cycles, that's a defense that a developer may have when you bring an SB 800 claim. 326 is incorporated into Civil Code Section 551, so it's easy to find. Again, you can Google it if you want, and you can print out the text, or you can look at the Civil Code. Either one. It's short, and it's a good reference tool to have. And maybe we can get Rachel or Kat to send out a copy when we send out our summary of the presentation. It became law January of this year. People started planning for implementation, and then what happened? I don't know, Karim. We had a pandemic. Is that what, something
That's
happened?
Right.
Something occurred between January 1 and now.
It's somewhere between pandemic and procrastination. I'm not sure where it landed.
Some riots, some protests, just a few things have come up that have kind of sidetracked. But I think when you hear Karim speak today, we've got some really good ideas till things get back to normal of how to protect yourself and your association until we get full swing back into inspections and normalcy. There's a few cases that also have arisen around the country, and it really comes up like this. Association is not looking and investigating their projects. A statute of limitations is blown. You wait too long to bring claims. You then have to special assess members for repairs that could have been paid for by the developer. And then members in the community sue the association for your failure to investigate and failure to bring claims. So we've recently seen a case in Maryland, which basically said, if you've got a duty to maintain the common area, that equals the duty to inspect, and that equals this duty to bring claims if you find defects. You can't just stick your head in the sand. And there's another new one in, go to the next slide, in South Carolina, about 1.5 years, 2 years old. Same thing, and these are Court of Appeals cases. Now in California, we haven't had any appellate court rulings yet that are directly on point about this issue, but I don't think it's a large stretch to say, hey, you've got this fiduciary responsibility to maintain the common area in a safe manner, which equals reasonable investigation. And lastly, important thing to remember is that your D&O coverage, your directors and officers insurance that you have to cover these kind of claims, say you've blown the statute of limitations and now you special assess and members bring claims, they specifically exclude coverage for claims for failure to act when it relates to construction defects. And some of them are very broad. Depending on what your policy says, you have a real exposure for no insurance coverage if a member brings a claim later against the board for failure to investigate and failure to bring claims for construction defects. So that's important, the way that ties into SB 326. Go to the next slide, Karim. So that is the bill in 20 minutes or less. It's 3 years of lobbying that went on to get to this bill. It is a very, very in-depth and it's going to have a lot of impact on associations the next couple of years. And I think when you hear Karim's presentation about the technical aspects of this, you're going to have a much better view of why it's so important to look at this. So I'll turn it over to Karim.
Thank you so much, Ritchie. That was very informative. I want to just pause for a second and say that give you a little bit of background on myself. And I am a licensed civil engineer and started this company about 33 years ago. So I founded it based on certain principles about longevity and life expectancies and sustainability. I was working for a general contractor, Turner Construction, and a roofing subcontractor called Precision Roofing. And I learned that there were many assemblies that were prematurely failing. In fact, 95% of them were prematurely failing. Like roofing systems would only last like 15 or 20 years, where most commercial roofing were capable of lasting like 40 or 50 years. So that sort of led me into a quest of learning and researching as to why some things fail prematurely. And a lot of it had to do with improper construction, improper selection of materials, design, different issues that can lead to premature failure. And premature failure in waterproofing, especially on elevated decks and systems and assemblies like this, are obviously dangerous. So that's been my background. My background is in roofing and waterproofing, but our company specializes in all kinds of building assemblies, including mechanical systems, air conditioning, fire protection, and any aspect of the curtain wall, windows, siding, below grade waterproofing. So we're very broad, and a lot of the work we do, we serve the homeowners association in our type of field. So here's a partial list of homeowners associations, and in Hawaii they're called AOAOs. Our firm is stretched across the whole entire country from the East Coast to Hawaii, and we have over 200 employees that do nothing but this kind of work, and we serve a lot of associations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my involvement and how this bill got involved. This bill, SB 326, got passed. And it got created after a apartment balcony in Berkeley collapsed. In 2015, the balcony collapsed. And prior to this, obviously, we had been looking at thousands and thousands of balconies for both HOA clients and apartments. But more specifically, apartments. We were looking at a lot of apartment balconies that were just as bad. They were ready to collapse. And I had been there for these clients to look at it, to catch it before it happened. And so there was, I was brought into this case as an expert witness and represented one of the parties in the case. But it's a real sad affair. This is an actual scene of happened. And here's a oh. Can you guys hear the speaker or not? I'm sorry if you weren't able to hear it, but I was playing I was playing a recording, and since
we could not hear it.
Okay, since you're not able to hear it, I'll just basically tell you that there was a recording from the police that were talking about this balcony collapse, and they didn't know if it was a structural issue or what happened. So it was an upper balcony that collapsed in part onto the lower balcony, and people basically fell off, and they fell down 4 stories down, and there were 10 or 11 fatalities, and 1 or 2 students survived. It was a small balcony packed with a lot of people, but that's not the cause of the failure. Structurally speaking, this balcony was actually designed to be twice as strong as was required by code. And you could easily have 10 or 11 or 12 people on there, so it shouldn't have been an issue at all. The problem was water intrusion, and water was intruding into the balcony. If you look at the lower part of the balcony, you don't really see much signs of water intrusion. You don't see that there is staining, there's mushrooms growing, there's any widespread obvious sign that this balcony is distressed. And there wasn't such a sign on the upper balcony either before it collapsed, and unfortunately, resulted in the deaths of a lot of people. So this is a picture standing on a scaffold looking at the part of the structure that's still left on the building. Here's the door, the balcony door above us, and here are the beams, the structural cantilevered beams that are coming out to sort of pick up the balcony load, the floor joists and the rim joists. And you can see how rotted they are. And these are made out of engineered lumber. The engineered lumber, like glulam beam and composite beams, are very, very strong. Can everybody hear me now? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing things. Khadija, Ritchie? Okay.
Yes, Karim.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you. So anyway, these structures are very strong. These composite structures, the beams are very, very strong. They're in fact 2 or 3 times stronger than natural wood. The problem is that they have glues in them that are not watertight, not waterproof. So when water gets to them, they fail much faster than normal wood. Normal wood has tannins. It has a lot of life expectancy, and despite damage, it starts to sag and it starts to kind of creep, and it takes a while for the failure to happen. But in engineered lumber like this, you can see the fibers on this lumber. This is not natural wood. This is an engineered wood. And engineered lumber like this is extraordinarily strong, but unfortunately, when it gets wet, it can fail catastrophically. It can, boom, just go without any kind of notice, any kind of deep sagging. There was a little bit of sagging noticed in these beams, in these balconies, but then again, there were a lot of people on the balcony as well. You could see that's the underside of the balcony. We're investigating in a warehouse and looking at it, and just all the wood underneath it had completely gone. And part of it is that there's a stucco soffit, and any moisture that gets in gets trapped. That moisture just slowly cooks away at the wood and just rots it out. And so when you look at it from the outside, and I'll remind you of the picture here where we were seeing the underside of this balcony, it looked pretty clean. You know, you don't see anything because the underside is stucco, and you don't really see any obvious signs that something is failing. In fact, the code doesn't even allow, at the time, it didn't allow for the underside of the balcony to be vented. So there was no vents. And so any moisture that got in would just get trapped. And that trapped moisture would just erode away and rot away the wood until it finally collapsed. So this is an extreme case, the Berkeley collapse. And I've seen, in the last 10 years, I've probably seen 20, maybe 30 such balconies that were about ready to collapse. Had it not been intervened by us, had we not seen it, seen the tiny little signs that we could make out on a visual inspection, and then it prompted a more serious destructive testing and led to us making those balconies safe. But had we not caught those, there would have been, in the thousands that we looked at, there would have been maybe 10 to 20 that could have collapsed, that could have had this type of damage. So the visible signs are very, very low, okay? And so you have to really understand, you have to be an expert to really detect it. You have to be an expert that understands what to look for. And I'm gonna share those photos with you. I'm gonna share that experience with you today so you get a sense of, you know, what to look for. And so here are some of the, first of all, like Ritchie was explaining, there are a number of structures, elevated decks that are part of this law that's covered by SB 326. So what are they, right? You've got balconies, and balconies are, some of them are covered, some are more exposed to the weather, but here your stacks of private balconies and lanais. And here's another type. Now these are cantilevered up here, as opposed to the ones in the previous picture that were not cantilevered. So these are supported on the outside with beams and columns, okay, that are carrying the load both on the outside edge of the balcony and on the inside edge of the balcony. So you'd have to have a loss of the column in order for the collapse to happen in a situation like this. So they're a little bit safer. These balconies that are cantilevered with just protruding out of the building, very similar to the Berkeley balconies, right? So they are now dependent on the framing members, the cantilevered wood joists that are protruding out of the building to carry the load of the balcony. These are much more dangerous than the previous photos that I showed you. So you have to understand the structural nuance of them. Here's another example of walkways. You can see that walkways are often open. These are also called breezeways. And so wind-driven rain can get onto them. Water can erode away the structural members. There's often topping slab and concrete on top of these, even though they're built on top of wood. And so it's difficult to ascertain if this is leaking or not. You know, again, you have to be an expert and you have to understand the signs of what to look for. The other type of a structure that's covered as part of SB 326 are stairs and stair landings. So stairs are, as you can see, a structural member here, a stringer, a central stringer that's connected up at the top of the stringer, you know, and if let's say that the beam that's holding up the stringer up here is rotted, the whole staircase can collapse, it can fall down. So these stair landings and these stair structures, they are elevated in nature and they are part of the law, and you have to inspect all of these. I'm gonna pause for a second and ask if people have questions Um, and if you have questions, once again, hover down at the bottom. You will see a Q&A. Click on the Q&A, and it'll open up a window, and then type in your questions if you have questions. You can also type a private message to the panelists by clicking on the chat feature. If you want to personally ask a question by voice, raise your hand, press on the raise your hand button, and then we'll open that up for you. So, any questions thus far?
Karim, we did have one about does this cover apartments as well or just HOAs? Yeah, I think I could answer that. I mean, so
please do.
Yeah, we talked about so there is a separate bill that was passed a year before SB 326 that was specifically applies to apartments, and that's called SB 721. SB 26 is just for CIDs and homeowner associations, so completely separate bill with different requirements. See, we had a few others.
Yeah, the other question was, does this have to be a normal visual inspection completed by a manager or completely done by a contractor? So it is not something that is designed for a manager to do. It is required to have a licensed professional do it. That's not to say that you as a manager can't learn how to recognize signs of a problem, or you as a homeowner can't learn how to recognize the signs of a problem. I'm going to teach you that today. I'm going to teach you how to look for this. And you can take pictures yourself. You can send us these pictures. And we will review these pictures and give you a feedback for free. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe as an engineering firm. Life safety is obviously very important to all of us. And if you send us your pictures, we will review them and give you that feedback for free. And if it needs an immediate inspection to be done by a firm like us, we'll arrange that with you, and you can engage us or someone else that's qualified to go inspect it. But that doesn't mean that you can't do your own inspection, and I'll show you how. So the other question that people asked was to clarify that structural steel, if the building is made out of structural steel, the framing members are concrete, that this bill doesn't apply. And that part is true. It's not to say that steel can't rust. I've had garages that were underground, that were built with steel deck and steel beams, and I've seen so much rust that there were sections that were ready to fall down. And it was a life safety issue. So it's not to say that steel can't, but this bill doesn't cover it. And the other question that people asked was, what about enclosed staircases, most likely made out of wood? And the staircases are covered. If water can get into the stair wells, in this case, the stair wells are somewhat exposed to the weather. Wind-driven rain can get into the stairwell, and water can be on the landing, it can be on the stringers. Even though this stringer is made out of steel, the structure is made out of wood, and the steel stringer is actually connected to a wood beam. And so if the wood beam is damaged, the steel is not going to do anything. Even though the steel is not rusted, it'll fall down because it's supported by wood. So all of these things are, in fact, important.
There was one other one. There was one other interesting one I saw, Karim, which was how does this bill interact with San Francisco's inspection requirements? Berkeley has its own inspection criteria, and the bill. It's an interesting reason why not to wait as well till the latter part of 25 to get this done. Is that the bill allows different municipalities to come up with more stringent inspection bills if they want. So you have a risk that some other municipalities might come up with something that's more restrictive or more intrusive, and That's why you want to try to get your inspections done as fast as you can.
Somebody also asked the question whether these balconies, which are covered that are not cantilevered, are they required to be inspected? The answer is yes. The answer is that these are also required to be inspected. So long as they're made out of wood and the supporting framing structure is wood, they're supposed to be inspected. The other question that got asked is a deck structure that is on top of a garage or a flat roof also need to be inspected as part of SB 326. So SB 326 simply says that it's a walking surface. People are going to be walking on it. And if there's a part of the roof that you're using as an amenity deck where people can congregate on it and utilize it, then that would qualify. I can tell you that I walked on many roofs in my lifetime. And I remember the scariest one that still sticks out in my head. I was walking on top of a gymnasium roof, and this gymnasium was 30 feet high. So basically, there was very high ceiling inside of this gymnasium. And, I was walking on a very firm roof, and my foot went right through part of the roof. And I almost basically, half of my body was down into that, my foot was down through the hole in the roof because the roof was rotted. I've had occasions where when I was working for the roofing contractor, we had people that fell through the roof, right through the rotted part of the roof. And this individual, this was another 20, 30 foot tall roof. This individual got very lucky. It was a warehouse and there was bales of material sitting, and he fell on top of this soft, fluffy bales of material, and he was not injured at all. And we sent him home for the day. He came back to work the next day. But my point is that elevated structures of any kind that are made out of wood that can rot are part of the bill. That's just what's covered. Any other questions?
I'm kind of answering a few of them while we go. So I think that's...
So the other question that is what if owners refuse to gain access to the vendor? What is the association's liability? So that's Ritchie, I'll let you answer this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on what your CC&R say in terms of access and ability, but you need to comply with the bill, and it may create some issues with your individual members, and it's going to depend on what your CC&R say and who has the maintenance responsibility for what. But I think you also talk about some things that you might be able to get at some of the inspections without getting on the balcony, correct? Karim, you're gonna...
That's right, yeah. Often our initial inspections, we can actually do from the ground. And especially like a balcony like this, we can look at the edges of the balcony by looking up through binoculars. So we'll look up through binoculars. We can also look with an infrared camera to see if there's moisture, especially after a rain. And so long as the building hasn't been freshly painted. If it's freshly painted and you've painted over all the stains, we're looking for stains. That's really our evidence. Even if there's one drop of a stain, it would be important for me to know and for us to look further. But ultimately, if there are stains in a balcony, then we would need to go get inside people's units, look up and stand on the balcony and look up at the ceiling of the next balcony, above us. And so that type of an inspection is important. But we'd be looking at the ceiling of this floor here. We'd be looking at the ceiling of this ground floor unit here. If there's a ground floor unit, we don't need to get access. We could just walk on the outside and look up and see. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your questions, because it's important for us to understand what you're thinking and to be able to answer your questions. So now I'm going to talk about, does water leak? How does water leak? How does damage actually occur? In a given balcony, this is a plan view of a balcony. Here's a sliding door at the top. Here's a little closet that has the hot water heater. This is a little storage closet off of the balcony on the right on the bottom side. And so you could have a side entrance door. When you look at a balcony on the perimeter, it's got lots of doors. You know, it could have a sliding door, it can have man doors, it can have entrance doors. And so the perimeters are quite busy with flashings and door thresholds, which can all become a part of an area where water can get in. So water can, you know, each of these areas as doors and ends and corners, they all have sheet metal type flashings that are lapped. And the laps in the sheet metal flashings can become a pathway for water. So each of these red highlighted areas are potential for water intrusion. And there are many, many such areas for water intrusion in a balcony. Like the whole sheet metal flashing itself may have been done wrong. And if the perimeter of the deck isn't properly watertight, water could intrude from any one of these perimeter areas. Actually, it doesn't have to fail right through the waterproofing membrane. Another vulnerable area is in the front, the scupper, because all the water gets directed to the scupper. The area in front of the scupper could be potentially leaking. When you add up all the places in a balcony that are vulnerable, you know, this is just a composite drawing that shows all the different areas that are vulnerable that could introduce water into the balcony. There's a lot of areas where water can come in, right? So an expert, as I look at this, and I know that I'm looking for all the vulnerabilities on a balcony like this. And ultimately, if there is leakage, most of the water stays contained in the balcony or the elevated deck assembly or the stair landing. So if you look from underneath, you don't see much. You see very, very slight signs of leakage. Most of the water stays contained in the wall cavities. Most of the water will stay contained in the deck itself, in the structural members of the deck. So water just gets absorbed like sponge into these areas, and it'll just sit there and start to rot things away because it's coming in from all these different areas, and you don't know it, right? So I'm looking for signs that I've seen when water intrusion is happening like this. There are some signs, and I'm going to show you what those signs are, you know, and how they look like what's the tip of the iceberg. And I'll talk about the tip of the iceberg a lot, but these signs are not always obvious. These are pretty pretty difficult to organize. One of the questions that came up was, do you need to open an area on each balcony and walkway to complete the inspection? The fact of the matter is that we need a certain amount of exposed area, but we don't necessarily need to do destructive testing on every balcony. And I'll show you what we can, you know, what we need to see and what we are typically looking for before we'll get into the destructive testing. And the destructive testing could be pretty minor too. We can look at things with like borescopes and stuff like that. But let me get through this section on showing you what signs we can see. Here's a good sign, right? This is this white chalkiness that we're seeing on the surface of the stucco. And what is it, right? It just looks like, boy, somebody hasn't painted the exterior wall in a while, and you've got some white stains here, like some water stains. What's really happening is that there's a lot of water that's getting in this wall cavity. And this water is trying to dry out. As the water that's inside the wall, as it's drying out, it brings the salts that are in the cement plaster, in the 1-inch thick stucco. It's bringing the salts out of the walls, and it's then drying to the surface. So these salts are getting drawn out with water. So if there's efflorescence, that means there's enough water getting in behind the stucco that's now trying to dry to the outside, which creates these staining. I look for this and I go, I got to look at this more carefully because this could be a problem. Here's another obvious sign. right? There's a little bit of staining that we see. In fact, there's a little bit of staining you can see even on the roof of this, ceiling of this particular balcony. And there's obviously, there's some staining here. You can see that the staining is not just water dribbling down the stucco, but it's definitely got some coloration to it and some brownish type of colors to it. And usually wood and waterproofing membranes, when they get wet and water runs off of these wet areas, it produces what we call tobacco juicing. Tobacco juicing is brown colored stains that maybe, to use a crude word as the way it came from is, when people were chewing tobacco and spitting, you see the brown tobacco juicing. And that's really where the terminology came from. But it is a term of art that is used by the roofing and waterproofing industry a lot. And they talk about tobacco juicing. And so tobacco juicing is what we're really looking for. And it's very hard to see, but all you see here is very slight amount of staining in the ceiling here, and you see some strong ceiling stains in the front part of the balcony. Okay, and to me, I'd be investigating that. Here's what we find when we get behind such minor staining. See a lot of significant rot. So a small little stain, even a couple of drops of tobacco juicing type of stains could mean that you have such severe rot. Okay, so the warning signs are very, very little. They're not easy to spot. So you want to see the warning signs of these. And here's one of the warning signs that I look for. Here's a handrail penetration that has cracks emanating from it. You can also see at the base of this handrail, there's some rust. Okay, there's rust because there's moisture accumulating. It's causing that handrail to rust, and it's causing that concrete to blow out and spall, because when metal rusts, it expands. And as it expands, it's pushing the concrete, it's cracking the concrete. And so I'm looking at signs like this thinking, okay, that could mean that there might be a waterproofing flashing failure here, because there is rust going on in this handrail. The other kinds of things that I look for is, how is the deck connected to the wall, right? How is this beam, how is this handrail wall connected? Now, this type of a detail may be present in a balcony, it may be present in a stair landing, could be present in a walkway. It doesn't have to be a private balcony. These are just examples of the kinds of things that we look for. So here, there's an open gap. It looks like, they've tried to create a pocket here for the flashing. You can see some metal flashing inside of it. It's hard to see just visually if this is a problem. But here's what triggers me to a problem. I see this staining down here, down at the bottom, okay? This staining tells me that there is a problem, that this water from this corner is not just getting kicked out and coming out of the balcony and coming out of the wall, that some or all of this water is staying in the wall cavity, and it's going down, it's potentially damaging the end of this beam, it's potentially damaging this wall, okay? So a little stain like this could mean a lot. And I'll show you some pictures. Here's some more examples. Here's a stair. In this instance, I saw some damage down here at the balcony. There was some cracks, and I'll show you a close-up shot of this. And before we even did any destructive testing and opened it up, I asked the owners to shore it. So here's the temporary shoring and columns that were put up just to make sure that this staircase remains safe, okay, for people's entry. And you can see that the amount of opening in the wall is not that much. You only have this much opening in the wall that's allowing wind-driven rain to come in. So it's not like open to the sky completely, but there's some level of wind-driven rain that falls on this balcony, on this landing. Here's a close-up shot of how damaged this was. Okay, so it has quite a bit of damage from this landing. And here's a typical structural connection. The structural steel stringer is connected to this beam. This is a glue laminated beam that we can see that the structural member is connected to. It's behind the stucco. And we are seeing some cracks here. We're seeing some staining here, which is what we were looking for signs of a problem. You can see this crack. You can see that there's a little bit of water that's there's some water that's coming from the top and it's causing a stain. You can also see that there's some water that is coming out of the crack that is not coming from the top. But this is clear evidence that water is leaking out of the crack. Anytime you see water coming through the crack, coming out through the crack of a stucco wall, it's a problem. Generally, that shouldn't happen. Cracks should be minor. There should be hairline. Water can get inside of the cracks, but there's building paper that usually manages this water. If it's incidental, it's not going to cause a major problem. But if the cracks if there's evidence of water coming through the crack, it's usually a problem. So here's your glue laminated beam. A lot of water had been getting into this area. A lot of damage did occur. And, as you can see, the steel stringer is just bolted onto this wood. So if this wood rots, you've got failure. The stringer can fall. And there's only one stringer that's bolted on to this glue laminated beam. And these large structural beams, like glue laminated beams, like I explained in the Berkeley balcony collapse, they're actually more susceptible to water damage than a traditional lumber. This was made out of, traditional Douglas fir, a single piece of beam. It has more capacity to handle water damage than glue laminated beams. A lot of the construction today is being done by, lumber that is not glue laminated, that is glue laminated or, engineered lumber is what we call it. I'm going to show you another sign of damage, okay? You look at this picture, you see that there's a scupper above it. And you think, okay, there's a little bit of staining here because water drips off of the scupper, it causes the staining. And you dismiss it as being, okay, that doesn't really mean it's a leak. And that's true. A stucco, a scupper that's dripping water, not necessarily a leak, right? That stain itself could be nothing. But here's what I see. If you look at this crack, this tiny little crack, first of all, there's a crack. Why is there a crack here? Why was there a crack here for that matter, right? Why is stucco cracking in this manner? It's cracking because the wood got wet. When the wood gets wet, it expands. And when the wood expands, it causes the stucco to crack. So I look at these cracks in these strategic places and I go, cracks could mean a problem, right? So I'm typically looking at cracks, I'm looking at water coming through cracks. In this instance, if you look closely, you can actually see water coming out of the cracks. You can see tobacco juicing coming through the cracks, okay? And that is a sign that there is water potentially in this wall. Here's another good example of the same thing. Again, the bottom of the balcony is all stucco, can't see it. But you see some cracks here and you see some tobacco juicing here, okay? To me, I would virtually guarantee that there is a damage, that water has gotten in and there's damage here. And as you can see, there's not a lot of signs of this. You have to be really looking for such minor damage. Often owners will paint their buildings. If you as a homeowners association are painting your building, I urge you to have this inspection done before you paint the building. Because the problem that I get as an expert, if I'm brought in a freshly painted building, all of these signs will be gone. I won't be able to see them, right? If I can't see them and visually alert myself to, hey, potential problem, and I need to do a probe here or tear out part of the ceiling and look further. If I can't do that, then I'm kind of blind. So painting over this because you got stains is the worst thing you can do, okay? If you have stains, if in fact you are painting the building, I urge you to first do this inspection before you paint the building. Because if you paint it, we're not gonna see signs for another 2, 3, 4 years. It may take that long before water slowly, gradually leaks back through those cracks and creates the staining that we wanna see. When we open these things up, you can see that often there's quite a bit of damage. In fact, the plywood on the top here was so rotted that when we took the topping slab away, the plywood just came off, and you could pull it off with your hand. And you can see how damaged the wood was. But if you recall the pictures I showed you preceding this, there's not a lot of signs. There's not a lot of signs of damage. There was just a little stain, just one crack. You had to really look carefully to even see it, right? And then when you see that, the damage could be a lot more extensive. So that's really an important distinction. It's important to know that you're looking for minor little damage like this, okay? Any questions about this?
I think we've answered most of them that have come through so far.
I really appreciate your questions. Keep asking them. Again, there's a Q&A section at the bottom. If you hover your mouse, there's a Q&A thing. Click on it. There's also, you can raise your hand if you want to really verbally ask a question, or you can text us personally by using the chat function. So all three methods are available to ask questions. I really open it up for that. So here's some more, again, here's a topping slab. This is looking at it from the top down. This is how rotted the plywood is, okay, and the framing members. And if you were walking on this concrete topping slab, you never would have known that the wood underneath it is so far rotted. The unfortunate people that were in the Berkeley apartment collapse, they were walking on that deck, they didn't know. Had they known it was rotted like this, they wouldn't be walking on it. So the problem is that you can't see it. And that's why this law and this bill was passed, so that people would be alerted to significant damage that could be there. With signs of this damage is very, very low. So a question that was asked was, if a complex has recently been painted, how would you do the inspection? So if a complex has been recently painted, what I would first of all, if you wanted to do a thorough inspection, you would need to do a probe type of inspection, where we would drill little holes, go in with a borescope and look at critical elements. You would need an expert. You wouldn't be able to do it yourself, okay? You would need an expert to come in and look for signs like, what do things look like from the top? Like, for example, these kinds of signs. And I would be looking for construction and seeing how it was built. And could this construction be defective? One of the things that I want to point out here is that this metal that's used is flashing. It's a defective kind of flashing, okay? I know this because it's made out of aluminum. It's extruded aluminum. It's not a flashing. It's actually a formwork to keep the concrete, intact on the topping slab. So it's really installed for the topping slab. But the waterproofing people, contractors, general contractors, subcontractors, use this kind of flashing, okay, for waterproofing. They'll terminate the waterproofing to this piece of metal. The Berkeley collapse had the same exact metal. Every time I see this metal, I know there's a problem, right? That 99.9% of the time when a piece of metal like this is used as a flashing, it doesn't work. So for me as an expert, I'm looking for lots of other things that you're not. I'm going to be teaching you what to look for yourself and how to find things yourself. One of the questions that somebody asked is, do you have examples where balcony is concrete slab, but the posts are wood? In fact, most of these examples that I was showing you, there is a concrete slab on these balconies. But underneath the concrete slab, it's all wood. Okay, here the landing is made out of concrete, but the slab is here. Again, if you looked at the top, there's concrete. It's not wood. So majority of the buildings, you're not just going to find a post that's wood. All the framing members are going to be wood. Okay, and just the concrete topping slab doesn't mean that it's concrete building. It's not a concrete building just because the topping slab is concrete.
We had a few questions also, Karim, about when to do these and what would be the advantage of doing them now versus later. So I think maybe we reviewed that the bill requires to do inspection every 9 years, but the first inspection has to be done by 1/1/25. The advantage of doing them more earlier than later is a few things. One, like we talked about before, a municipality could pass a more stringent bill, which means you might have a
Berkeley.
burden. Berkeley does
Like
have one.
Berkeley did, San Francisco
already does, right? And second, if you do find construction defects, and we all know that SB 800 has certain timeframes associated with bringing claims, so you don't want to miss any of those timeframes, because if there are defects, the better approach would be to have the developer pay for those. If you wait till the last minute, and you tell me, Karim, if he's doing these right before 2024, there's just not going to be enough qualified people to do the kind of inspections you need. So waiting the last minute is never a good tool. And even further, if there's damage occurring, you want to get it early, because by waiting, you're just allowing more damage to which can be result in a more expensive repair potentially. So we always recommend sooner than later.
Yeah, more importantly, if your project is less than 10 years old, you must inspect. Don't even think about the date, that you have and the deadline for 2024. Inspect it. If your project is less than 10 years old and you're about to paint it, I strongly urge you not to paint it and have the inspection done before painting it. Okay, if the project is older than 10 years old, and you've had history, or some people have had damage and repairs done, and there's been some ongoing, even out of the 500 units, you've had repairs done on 4 or 5 units. That's a good indication that there may be lurking damage behind a lot of these, okay? And so look at the maintenance history, look at the leak history. I'm gonna show you what to look for, right? What type of things to look for, and how to find things. So with COVID, it's becoming more challenging. A lot of people actually not letting us into their units, especially for routine type of inspections like this. And obviously health has become a primary concern to everybody. And so I'm gonna show you how to take these kinds of pictures, how to submit them to us. And if you took lots and lots of photos of the underside of your own deck, you're standing in your own balcony and looking up, you took pictures of your neighbor's balcony from above, I'll have an idea if that balcony potentially has a problem. But I need to have certain quality pictures taken in order for us to do this review. If you have multiple people, multiple board members, if you just send out a notice to all of the residences, we're going to be publishing this seminar on how to do it yourself inspection, step-by-step instructions. Anybody that registered for the seminar will have an opportunity. You will receive this PowerPoint, a copy of this PowerPoint will be given at the end. And not today, but within the next 48 hours, we're going to make this available. And you'll be able to use this methodology to take your own photos and upload it to us. And if a whole bunch of concerned people did it and sent us photos, it's a great way to learn if there is a potential problem. And we'll look at these photos and we'll send you a reply back on these photos and what we see for free. You'll get this advice from us for free, and then you'll at least have an idea that you have a potential problem or not. And you may want to hurry up and do this inspection sooner than later if you really do have a problem. So how do we go through this process? I have, in the previous slides, I showed you what types of things we're looking for. We're looking for the tiniest stains. We're looking for cracks that have potential. It looks like water's coming out through the crack in the stucco. We're looking at siding that may have some rot or has, again, signs of moisture. So you want to take, even when you have those tiny, tiny little stains, you want to take pictures of them. But I want to show you how to go about taking pictures, right? You want to take a picture from far away, showing the whole balcony. Maybe you're standing on your own balcony or a landing. You're taking a picture of the whole entire balcony with a wide angle lens. And then you're taking close-up shots of the ceilings of the balcony from your neighbor above. You're taking close-up shots of how the corner of the balcony ends, how the window or the door interfaces with the balcony. So you want to take different kinds of photos. You want to take what I call macro photos, which is the overall shot. And you take micro photos, which are the close-up shots, okay? Try and take both. Use a tape measure if to give perspective of how big or small things are. Use a tape measure or ruler, okay, to do that kind of perspective. So here's an example of a macro shot. A macro shot is a faraway shot. It could be a shot of this particular balcony that you see down in the foreground, and it's standing on the ground looking up, right? That's a macro shot. You can also use your emergency exit plan, okay, that's usually on stair landings and in elevators. You can point to where you are. You can say, hey, my finger points to where I am, where my balcony is, where my landing is, what am I looking at? You can just point to this diagram. It's very easy to do because this emergency plan is required to be posted in most places. You can also take a picture of your apartment or condo unit. You can say, okay, I'm in unit 1105. That's my unit. And here are some more macro shots. So these are identifying shots as to where you are, right? Where the picture is being taken. These are identifying shots. They're important. Then you have an overall shot. Here's a faraway shot. You're standing inside. You're looking out at the balcony. Here's your full balcony, right? You can see the full view of the balcony. Here you're standing on the balcony and taking an overall shot of the balcony picture to give an idea of what this balcony looks like when you stand in this balcony. This is what I call a macro shot. Take a bunch of macro shots. This is another example of a macro shot where you're looking up at your neighbor's balcony above you, or you're standing on the ground looking up. Check this out. You see this little crack here down at the bottom? And this crack is brown. You can see parts of the crack. There's water emerging out of the cracks. Guaranteed this is a problem. So I look at this and I know that this is a problem. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these kinds of staining. I'm looking for these kinds of evidence, okay, of issues. Here's the other thing that we look for, the carpet. If you have a carpeted in your to the balcony door, see if you can pry up and pull up the carpet. It's usually just basically matted down onto the carpet tack strip, which has these little, tacks in them, and pull it up. It's very easy to pull up, and it's very easy to put back down. Takes a minute or two, and I do this inspection all the time. Pull it up and look at the condition of the carpet tack strip. See if there is staining. See if there's staining on the carpet tack strip. See if you can see the nails are rusting, the tacks are rusting, okay? You can also see some staining on the baseboard, okay? You can see the staining on the baseboard without even having to pull up the carpet. So when you see staining like this, there's usually a problem, And, and it's evidence that moisture is leaking past the balcony door and it's coming inside, which could mean that it's leaking down below and the framing down below is getting damaged. Here's some more micro shots, close-up shots, right? When you're doing close-up shot, if you put your hand or the fingers in the shot, gives a perspective of how far away you are, how close up you are. Also how this threshold, see how this threshold is buried in the concrete. It's actually below the surface of the topping slab, which is not a good thing. Here you can see that the stucco stop is coming, almost down to the base of the concrete. And I'm using a tape measure to give an idea that there's only a 1/4 inch gap between the bottom of the stucco and what the scupper looks like. So I have a close-up shot of the scupper with a tape measure to give me perspective of how big the scupper is, how the scupper is done. And there are other things that I'm seeing here that, that you might not. I'm looking at this black here on the rim. This is part of the waterproofing that's exposed to the weather. It shouldn't be exposed to the weather, but it is. Right? And so it gives me an idea of what kind of waterproofing might have been used here. So close-up shots are important, okay, for many, many reasons, because I'm gonna look at these close-up shots, I'm gonna look at things that you probably wouldn't be looking for. But if I saw them, I can get a perspective. Here's a corner of the balcony. These corners are really important, okay? And as you can see, this corner of the balcony has the potential to allow water to get down behind the stucco, okay? This is a very important defect. And if I saw this, I would immediately flag this and say, I think I've got a potential problem, okay? Because this is directing water behind the stucco. People think that I have a building paper behind my stucco and that building paper is gonna protect me. Therefore, I don't have to worry about it. This water is just gonna go down in the building paper and the building paper will drain out at the base of the stucco. That's not the case. A building paper is not waterproofing. It's called weather resistive barrier. And it's essentially, its function is to only manage minor amounts of water that come through incidentally, okay, through cracks and other incidental areas where a little bit of water can get in behind the stucco, it'll manage it. This, on the right-hand side, you're directing water that's on the horizontal surface, like a private balcony or a landing, okay? And you're directing that water to go behind that corner. You can't direct any horizontal water running off behind the stucco. Stucco is just not designed, building paper is just not designed to handle this level of water coming into the assembly, okay? So these kinds of close-up shots or overall shots of sliding doors give me an idea of how things are built. This is getting a little technical, but we're measuring how tall the threshold is compared to the outside. And once again, using a tape measure and using a level to do that with. You don't have to go to that extent, but close-up shots, give me an idea of how things are. Any questions about this?
I've been answering them, Karim, while you've been speaking, so we'll probably have some more come in.
Okay. So here's some more tips about taking pictures. Okay. There are set the resolution of the camera between 3 and 5 megapixels, and the aspect ratio at 4:3 ratio. I mean, just normal pictures. But the important thing is that you want to make sure that there's a date and a timestamp on your pictures. Most cameras automatically will put a date and a time on every digital photo. The important thing is that the camera itself, that you set the proper date and time on the camera. A lot of people forget to do that. They don't actually set the date and the time in the camera, and it starts out at 000 or whatever, and it's sitting there at year 2000 or something, And so the date and the time, if the date and the time on the camera is set wrong, then all the pictures you take will have the wrong date. If you're taking pictures with your iPhone or with an Android device, it'll automatically stamp the date and the time. So that's a good thing. On flash, try and leave your flash on for darker rooms with poor lighting. And if you're taking a close-up, try not to use the flash, because when you take a close-up shot with the flash, the glare washes out the photo. So the thing is, if you were to take these pictures, we're gonna give you a place to upload these pictures to us, okay? We're gonna give you a portal. You'll be able to basically take 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 photos, and you'll be able to send us these photos by filling out a form and uploading it to our website. And as these photos come in, we will review them, and we will basically decide whether there is an issue here or not, and answer your questions. We'll send you an email back. If we have your phone number, if you want us to call you, we'll call you and talk to you about it. But you will receive within 24 hours, or maybe at the most 48 hours, we'll send you, anybody that registered for the seminar, we're gonna send you step-by-step instructions on how to take photos, how to upload them, and how to get these photos back to us. We have a limit of up to 30 photos that you can upload. So they could be full resolution. You know, you want to be 3 to 5 megapixel each, and we do want, don't try to compress the photos. If they're compressed too much, I can't zoom into them. We can't really look at them carefully. So try to use uncompressed image that are, when your camera is set to 3 to 5 megapixels, okay? And just send us those uncompressed image and upload those uncompressed image.
Karim, we've had a few questions that I think are along the same line. I'm not sure we've 100% answered them, and they're really going along kind of the theme of, well, if it's required to be done by an architect or an engineer, structural engineer, why are we taking pictures? And then the question we get all the time is, you know, if you're going to come out, how much is it going to cost to satisfy the requirements of SB 326? So maybe you can answer those two. And
yeah, what we're trying to do is to keep you guys safe, okay, in this COVID environment. And we would love to come out and do an inspection ourselves. If you want us to do that, no problem. You know, give us a call, contact us, email us, and we'll come out and do the inspection. You don't have to. But the problem that we face with these inspections is that because of COVID, most people don't want us in their homes. And there are lots of hoops to go through, okay? And so that's really the issue. So what we're trying to do is to start this dialogue about the inspection by having you guys that have access to your own apartment, you have access to your own balcony, you can take pictures and send it to us. It'll help us prioritize your project. If we see, and if you have sent us documentation that your project has real issues, okay, we're gonna A, prioritize it, B, will come out and do focused destructive testing, okay, to see how bad the problem is. And 3, will advise you on how to inform everybody, all of the homeowners about this issue. This will just get fast-tracked, okay, this process, and it's, I think, an important one to do because of COVID.
There's one other thing I wanted to add, Karim, that, you know, if the building is less than 10 years old, there's a couple advantages to having a law firm involved early on in the process. The first advantage is that while we're going through the investigation and before a final report's issued, all that back and forth is attorney-client privilege, and if we do get in a claim later, we can control the premises of when those are released. The second thing is that if it is less than 10 years old, And like we started, our firm works on contingency and advances costs. There'll be no cost to the association to do the investigation. So, you know, there's an important distinction between less than 10-year-old projects that might still have an SB 800 claim and those that are older than 10 years old. So, but this is a great way to start, because you can look at those pictures and determine, you know, if this is a risk category, right? When you investigate and look at the photo. So it's a great way to get started.
Yeah, it's essentially keeping you guys safe, okay?
Yeah.
And it's offering this service to keep you safe for free. And if you send us these photos, there's a portal, there's a method. Go through and take the pictures, send it to us. We'll review them for free. You want us to come out and do an inspection? Absolutely, we'll do that as well. And like Ritchie said, the distinction is that if the property is less than 10 years old, then Ritchie would then get involved, and his firm, Kasdan, would get involved, and they would do this for you for free. The professional inspection, they would pay us essentially to do all of the inspections, and you wouldn't have to pay for it. So that's the distinction on a property that's less than 10 years old. Property that's more than 10 years old, we would, again, if you send us pictures, we'll review those pictures for free. We'll give you our advice for free. If you want us to come out and do an inspection, we'll give you a proposal for that inspection and tell you what it would cost to do that inspection.
We're coming up against 12:30. I know we're running out of time. I was going to put my contact information as well in the notes, so that they can reach out if they have questions.
Yeah, there's here's information about how to contact us, and here's an email address, a phone number, and here's my contact and Ritchie's contact information and phone number. So please feel free to contact us. We're more than happy to help with any of this, answer any questions you have. We're going to make this particular seminar available online. Okay, you have to register. We'll send you an invitation. Anybody that has registered for the seminar, we're going to send you an email, and within 24 hours you'll receive an email, and you'll be able to click on that link, and you'll be go in and confirm who it is that you are. You will then have access to a YouTube that for this whole entire seminar. You can go and listen to this whole seminar once again. If you want to share it with your other homeowners, that weren't able to attend, or the board members that weren't able to attend, the board members can view this seminar on their own time and listen to it and learn from it. This is just free information that we want to pass on. We want all you to be safe. Number one, safe from COVID. Number two, safe from any kind of property damage and loss that might happen because of structural damage and water intrusion. So we both wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for all your wonderful questions.